Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the Cyber Gizmo, we're going to go back and take a look at what I had promised, which is when I was doing the benchmarks on the different file systems, I made a comment that, it probably would be really good to start looking at RAIDs. Because, a lot of these type of file systems are the kind of file systems that you might choose for your RAID. So I am going to include Bcachefs, ButterFS, Stratus, ext4, XFS, and I'm going to regret this, but I'm sort of including OpenZFS. I wasn't able to benchmark the one that I wanted, and I'll explain that when we get into it. So why don't we get started and take a look at this? So yeah, we've talked about the file systems that we used before, but let me talk a little bit about what happened with ZFS. So I'm using this on Fedora Workstation 40, and that has always got the latest kernel. Currently, that's 6.10.6. The problem is that the OpenZFS build for DKMS, which DKMS allows you to take a driver and create a process that installs it as part of the kernel. Why would you do that? Well, as we know, ZFS has a license that's called the CDDL that Linus Torvalds absolutely refuses to allow in the Linux kernel because he says that license will taint the GPL, which I'm not a lawyer. That's fine. I'm not going to argue with him. Whatever, whatever he wants to do is fine. But so that means that OpenZFS has to run in a different manner. And to do that, DKMS has to match up with the version of the kernel. Unfortunately, OpenZFS, at least the version that I'm using, 2.2.4, doesn't support kernels beyond 6.8. So it fails. It blows up during the install. All right, so now we've handled all that. So what did I do instead? Well, the other alternative you have is you can use ZFS for Fuse. Normally, I try to avoid Fuse like the plague because it always... So for those of you who don't know what Fuse is, Fuse allows file systems to run in user space. So that means you can run and do testing on file systems. You can check things out, but then you don't have to go through the lengthy certification process to get your file system certified to be placed inside the kernel. It's a good place to start anyway, and then you can find out if this is going to work or not. The problem is that there's a performance penalty here. Because you're running the driver in user space, it has to communicate with the Fuse server, which in turn communicates with the kernel in order to do sys requests on behalf of your file system to be able to get the resources assigned that you need. So yeah, generally Fuse, now it used to be horrible, and it still kind of is, but they have improved it. It's a lot better, so I thought, well, let's try it and see what happens. So, well, as you'll see, yeah, that was not the best idea I've had this year. So anyway, I've also pulled an old laptop out of mothballs. Why did I do that? Well, I have some old equipment. I have a Thunderbolt 3 controller that allows me to attach SATA SSDs to it. I don't have anything that allows me to test with 4ZFS NVMe drives. So yeah, without the NVMe support that runs at full speed. Now, I've got a couple that have two, but they only work at about 2,800 megabits per second. Well, that's not going to help. I mean, even if it was Gen 3, it should be a little higher than that. And Gen 4, no, it's not going to come anywhere near that. So to try to match things up so I don't have translation problems on Thunderbolt, I'm going to use Thunderbolt 3 to match up with the hardware controllers so that the drive speeds are all, and the transmission speeds are all matching up. So that's the reason why I drug that old laptop out of storage. It is a Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Extreme Gen 2 that has a Intel Core 9 9850 CPU, and it's got 32 gig of memory. It has Thunderbolt 3, as I mentioned, and that controller it's a cabinet, will hold up to 4 3.5-inch drives. So I put the SSDs in there. And of course, I had to grab some old ones for that too. This is like, how old of equipment can you get to do a benchmark test? So yeah, the two drives that I could find were, well, 4 drives I could find, 2 of which are Samsung 860s. So yeah, those go back a ways. And 2 Crucial MX500s, all 4 of them, excuse me, are 1 terabyte. So that'll allow me, you need 4 drives to test RAID 10, and you need at least 3 to do RAID 5. So you can put 4 on it, and I'm going to for RAID 5, so that'll work. I'm not going to test RAID 6. Yeah, that's just going to slow things down because it's just going to add another parity drive. The kernel we mentioned, it's 6.10.6, and the IO Zone 3 is 506, the same version I used last time. The scheduler is EBDF because of the kernel level that we're running, and I left it set to balanced. I probably made a mistake there. I probably should run it in performance mode on that box because it's older hardware. So, but there's not a whole lot of computation time going on here in this. This is strictly I/O. I'm not doing any compression, no encryption, none of that. So it's doing direct I/O. If I was, I probably would be, redoing the benchmarks with it on performance. But there's not a lot of processing overhead that's going on here. So the I/O scheduler, just like last time, is set to none. And so that forces the file system to do its own scheduling. And then we're going to go through the same. We're going to do from 1 concurrent user to 5. So 5 different runs with different levels of concurrency. How am I going to configure the RAIDs? If the file system under test has a native support for RAID 10 and RAID 5, I use that. ext4, ZFS, Stratus, none of those have native support for RAID 10 or RAID 5 built into the file system. So I had a choice between using LVM or the MDADM utility. Both of those use the MD driver in the kernel. So it shouldn't matter which one I choose, but if you want to see me run the tests on LVM, fine, put a comment below, and if I get enough requests, I'll do it. If not, I'm lazy and I'll probably blow it off. So let's get started and do the initial write. Let's take a look at that first. So this is RAID 10. The calculated value just ahead of time, so you know here, for RAID 10, the maximum throughput with 4 drives is about 1,475 megabits per second. That's right, megabits, not MIBI-bits, but megabits per second. All of these are being measured in megabits per second. So you know my feelings about the term MIBI bytes. That's a marketing thing that combines read and write. And we're not combining read and write here. We're measuring specifically reads and writes. So if you wonder about that, that's why I'm doing it this way. Rant over. So the initial write for Bcache-fs, it's not close to the mark for the maximum performance, but it's pretty good. ButterFS, pretty good as well. I mean, you can see some nice ramp up for Bcache-fs. ButterFS the ramp up time is really fast. And after the second concurrent user, it's already hitting full speed. ext4 and Stratus, it's okay, but it's not great. XFS does pretty well here as well. It has a nice smooth ramp up, which we kind of want. ZFS, yeah, not so much. Yeah, like I said, Fuse is probably not going to be the hot setup here for doing raids. But we'll keep going and see if that's true. So now we're configured for RAID 5, and we're doing the same test, the initial write again. This time, the maximum throughput should be around 875. That should be the cap. How did I calculate this? There are known algorithms for calculating RAID bandwidth. You could probably go find a calculator online for that. I've got spreadsheets that I created a long time ago, and I use those. So Bcache-fs, yeah, it's not close to the mark. ButterFS is. It's closer to the mark. And then the others, EXT, Stratus, XFS, not so good. ZFS does okay here. It's not great. It's only, yeah, it's only at about 75% of the maximum throughput. So reads, let's talk about those. Same thing, back to RAID 10. And Bcache is getting up there. It's starting to get closer. And ButterFS is a little bit slower, but still, it's not bad. ext4, Stratus, not so good. XFS, yeah, it's okay. I mean, you could say that that's in the ballpark at least, and then ZFS, same. It's in the ballpark as well. What about for RAID 5 on the reads? Well, let's talk about that. So in this case, we've got some problems here with Bcachefs and ButterFS. They are showing maximum bandwidth. They're showing bandwidth calculations that aren't possible because of so they obviously are either showing the results of going into memory, or they are bypassing some of the writes that you normally would do as part of a RAID 5. So something is wrong here. Something is clearly wrong with those. And so I don't accept those values. They're outside the box. Whereas if you look at ext4 and Stratus and XFS, they're inside the box. They're approaching the maximum, and that looks pretty good. ZFS, again, is, yeah, it's outside the box. Not so far outside, but nonetheless, it's outside the box as well. We already know that ZFS will report IOs complete, even if it's just a memory, because they do lazy writes, and that's just how they're written. But yeah, and it's hard to control. I've talked about this before. It's really hard to control when it does the write to disk now because of the way 224 is written. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying it makes it harder for us to benchmark. Okay, rereads. Back to RAID 10. We're seeing this is good. This is valid data here. We're maximum values here. Remember, it's 1475, and so yeah, both Bcachefs and ButterFS look like they're performing well. ZFS does as well. XFS, yeah, you could say it's performing well, just not as well. But EXT and Stratus, EXT4 at least, something's going on here. And Stratus is it's in the ballpark, but it's in the slow part of it. What about RAID 5? Again, this is data I would not expect for both Bcachefs and ButterFS. It looks way too high. Whereas ext4, Stratus, and XFS are more believable. Even ZFS, until you get out to the fifth concurrent user, looks valid to me. But that fifth concurrent user doesn't look valid to me. It looks like it's cheating. FReads. So the RAID 10 values, those, don't worry about these. These are buffered reads. It's going to be running just as fast as memory allows it to. That's normal. That's the way it's designed. And they all look pretty good except for XFS. As you can see, XFS has a huge divot. It's not obtaining the same amount of performance, at least on this test. However, if we look at, so let's look at the RAID 5, it closes up the gap on RAID 5. So this might have something to do with IO queuing. And I did notice that during this test that XFS was posting errors on the monitor. That I have a monitoring program that's running during these that tell me if there's a high rate of IO wait time, and yes, there was on that last test. This one, no. And you can see clearly all of them are performing very well in this test. What about FWrites? Well, FWrite, something went wrong with ZFS. Something went terribly wrong. Yeah, it was it was like noticeably slow. When this test was running, I was like, what is going on here? It's still sitting on the first concurrent user, and then it sat there for the longest time processing through it. So something went off the rails with that one. So not sure what it was, but This test follows the FRead, and IOZone doesn't have a lot of rest time between them. It has a little bit, but not very much. So I'm wondering if the IO request queue was full, and yeah, and it just couldn't get through. But that's hypothesizing. I don't know for sure. I'd have to investigate further. But clearly, the wheels came off of ZFS. So yeah. So on the RAID on the RAID 10 for the FWrite, yeah, all of them look good with the exception of ZFS. Bottom line, Stratus did really well in this test. The RAID 5, the wheels are still off ZFS. It's pulling off onto the. I think it went into the pits and had an engine change or something. But yeah, the rest of them are doing fine here. The only one that's kind of questionable is the ext4, besides ZFS, is that appears to be a little off the mark there. And I didn't notice any excessive queuing there, but I did notice that there was a high degree of CPU processing time, which would indicate that something was queuing up, something's getting managed there. So I don't know. Yeah, again, there shouldn't be any additional processing happening unless the system is causing it in a bottleneck. So yeah, mixed workloads. So let's look at RAID 10. Those all look pretty good for Bcache and ButterFS, and then a little bit slower for EXT and Stratus. XFS is a little bit off the mark, but it's within the ballpark. It's doing okay. It's just not as okay as the first two. ZFS is still suffering a heart attack. So yeah, not sure what is going on with that. So RAID 5, on this test, this looks within the range. So now there's a couple of outliers, and who knows, it could be some buffering that's going on in memory that's just blowing things through. So yeah, but yeah, it looks believable, and ext4, Stratus, and XFS are clearly not performing as well as Bcache and ButterFS is, and of course ZFS is still the wheels of it's running on the it's running on the rims. So PReads, we've talked about that before. Those are kernel APIs that allow you to do reads and writes that have offset in them, and so you can read it conventionally as a sequential file, but then you can also jump to different offsets within the file and begin your reading there, or writing there as well. So in this case, Bcache FS and ButterFS look good. They're looking fine. ext4 is in the ballpark. It's okay. Stratus, a little slower. XFS, not so good. ZFS, I think, kind of recovered, and then the wheels fell off again. So I think they got them bolted back on, and then it fell off again at the fourth and fifth concurrent user. That's why we do these kind of stress tests, because we're trying to push the driver to see where things kind of fall apart. It may have great performance in the middle, but then, yeah, you get out to where you're really pushing it hard, and then, yeah, it just doesn't handle the kernel. The interactions are just not good. So, yeah, this is not believable on Bcache and ButterFS. I'm going to wait till the end and give you some of my thoughts on what might be causing that. ext4 and Stratus and XFS look good. ZFS, yeah, remember that those three, Bcache, ButterFS, and ZFS, are all copy on write. PWrites, this is just the same kind of as PRead. It allows for offset, except this is the write portion of it. So these are believable. Yeah, we're below the 875 max on all of these workloads, but I would point out that ext4 is slow. Stratus is slow. XFS is pretty good, and ZFS is still in the pits. It hasn't got to the racetrack yet. So on RAID 5, Yeah, that's fine. Those look good. Remember, this is the max here is 875, and the max on 10 is 1475. So ext4, a little way off the mark. I think something's going on there. Same with Stratus. XFS, yeah, it's still a little bit slow, and ZFS is slow as well. So the two that are closest to the mark is Bcache and ButterFS. Random reads. In this case, yeah, they're doing fine, both of them. I think that looking at this, they're performing pretty close together, except for the last, the fifth concurrent user. Then ButterFS seems to be pulling ahead a little bit there. ext4, Stratus, and XFS and ZFS. No, they're not. They're not in the same. They're not in the same game as the ones on top. So RAID 5, yeah, those two on top again are not believable. Whereas ext4, Stratus, and XFS are more closely aligned with what I would expect to see from the driver. So clearly something is going on with Bcache and ButterFS. Random writes on RAID 10. So we're not pushing real hard, but remember, these are writes. And writes have additional overhead for RAID. So there's just more going on. So it's possible that it's just being overwhelmed a little bit. Or there's a bottleneck here that we need to look at. But that bottleneck is carrying all the way through all of them, because ext4 has a really serious bottleneck, and so does Stratus. XFS, yeah, it's a little bit better, but it's still off the mark. It's off the pace of the ones above, and ZFS is still trying to find its tires. RAID 5, this is believable. It's not as fast as I would hope, but again, these are writes. And then ext4, Stratus, XFS, those are not keeping pace, and ZFS kind of recovers a little bit, but not enough to make a difference here. Rewrites, this, yeah, again, same thing here. We're not close to the maximum bandwidth, but you don't have to be. It's just who wins the race here. And I would say the heat is between XFS and ButterFS here. Bcache-FS has a pretty good showing, but ext4 and Stratus are clearly the wrong file systems for these workloads for RAID 10 and ZFS, because I'm assuming it's because of Fuse. So RAID 5, because I've seen better performance out of it with even rotational drives than this. So RAID 5, that's believable for Bcache-FS and ButterFS. The pace for ext4 and Stratus and XFS is almost half of what it should be. And ZFS gets up about 75%, so even it's still off the mark. Reverse reads, we've kind of talked about all those. If you want to know what all those actually do, go see my previous video on it. There, I'll put a link up there for you. So yeah, this looks fine here. Bcache-FS, this is within the maximum expected bandwidth. And yeah, for all the way down to ext4. Stratus and XFS and ZFS clearly have problems here with this workload. And RAID 5, not believable. We've exceeded the maximum bandwidth again for both of those. And ext and Stratus and XFS are closer to what I would expect. And ZFS is still having issues with these workloads. The final one is stride read, and we've talked about that. It's more like a database. So yeah, this looks fine. It's believable at least, and ButterFS does best here in this workload. Although it ramps up pretty well. I'm looking through all of them, kind of as comparison. even the older ones do okay here. I wouldn't say they're stellar, but they're okay. XFS and ZFS, though, not so good. Not so good. RAID 5, yeah, not buying it. So for Bcache and ButterFS, that's not possible. If it's doing if it's doing RAID 5 correctly, and this could well, anyway, we're going to talk about that at the end. So I'm not going to try to solve it here, but yeah, ext4, Stratus, XFS, they all look believable. ZFS, no, no. What about who? So what does the GeoMean say about who won the test? So I think it's a dead heat on RAID 10, although I would have to give the nod to ButterFS here because of the ability for it to be a little bit more consistent in the higher workloads. Yeah, I mean it's there. Yeah, it's pretty close. You can use RAID 10 with either of those. It's fine. You shouldn't have any issues with it. EXT, Stratus, and XFS are probably not good choices, and ZFS on Fuse, definitely not a good choice. RAID 5, it's not believable even from the GeoMean. So that clearly was happening more often than not. So something is off here, but you shouldn't be using, so the documentation for both Bcache FS and ButterFS warn about using RAID 5 and RAID 6. There is, copy on write have a known issue called the write hole. And the write hole is an issue where if the system were to crash before the I/O is committed to the disk, you could have corruption in the RAID. Now, that corruption could just be data corruption, which is recoverable, or it could be severe enough that it was updating markers inside of the RAID that could actually turn your RAID into a heaping pile of smoking junk. So yeah, you could lose all the data, and they tell you that. And in fact, building the RAID 5 on ButterFS gave me the warning again. Hey, this isn't supported. Use at your own risk. You may lose all your data, is what it says, pretty much. ext4, I think we can conclude, is not the right file system for RAIDs. Neither is Stratus, neither is XFS, and neither is ZFS Fuse. I think we can eliminate those altogether. So I mean, that's where I'm going to kind of stay here with that. We've kind of talked about the RAID 10 and 5 for Bcache and ButterFS. I'm not really all that concerned so much about the RAID 5 results because you shouldn't be using those two anyway. You probably should be using some other alternative like ZFS, using DKMS with an operating system that supports the appropriate kernel. Those are going to be Ubuntu, Debian, those kind of things. Yes, or Open or FreeBSD to do it. We've talked. Yeah, I think I've warned you enough about this, and I don't think I need to beat the drum again. So, what about the overall results? Yeah, the bandwidth was closer to what I expected on ext4, Stratus, and XFS. The problem is there's enough workloads here that underperform that I can't recommend those in this kind of a scenario. ZFS on Fuse, I knew going in it was a bad choice, but yeah, what can you do? It is what it is, and I don't try to hide the truth from you. So, yeah. So what I would like to do at this point is to tell you that I did not test this with LVM. And the reason I didn't is that LVM and MD80M, which is the RAID manager that I used under Linux, they both use the MD driver. The difference between the two have to do with how the drives are architected for expandability. And both of them you want to install a file system on top of them. If you want me to, I can go back and I can configure LVM for RAID 10 and RAID 5 and rerun those tests for ext4, Stratus, and XFS and see if I do get a difference with it. And And yeah, we can try that if enough of you want me to do that. Otherwise, I'm going to play lazy guy and not be willing to do it. So unless you ask, unless you feel that I should. And if you do, I will do it. I'll be happy to do that. I would like to take a moment and thank my Patreons and also my channel members. Thank you guys and ladies so much for helping out with the channel. You help me in so many ways to be able to bring content back to you. That's what it is about, is trying to get things in here that, like devices and hardware that I can test that you might be interested in. And so, yeah, or giving you guys some direction, some ability to give direction on where the channel should go. So, I mean, that's kind of, so you guys are really my advisors on the channel. And that's how I kind of treat you guys. So thank you so much for your support. That's all I had for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please like and subscribe. And I hope to see you again this week. This video should have been last week. It just took me longer. I'm sorry about that. But, you know, sometimes these kinds of things, you know, you go down a road, you test one way and it doesn't work out. I tried to do the NVMe route. It wasn't going to work out. Wasn't going to get the kind of performance spec that I would wanted to see. And so I had to back up an era of technology to be able to get something that was reproducible. Anyway, hope to see you in the next video. Look for it coming out later in the week. And bye for now.